Welcome back. In our last episode, we explored front-end processes like registration and insurance verification. Today, we move into the middle of the revenue cycle, where clinical care becomes billable data. We'll discuss why complete documentation, accurate charge capture, and proper medical coding are essential to getting paid for the care you provide.
So let's get right into it. The entire mid-cycle, at its heart, is all about one crucial transformation. It's about taking that very human, very personal interaction of patient care and translating it into a language that financial systems can actually process. And you know, getting this translation perfect is everything for the financial health of an organization.
And it all starts right here. This is the foundation, clinical documentation. You can honestly think of this as the make-or-break moment for revenue. Everything that comes next, all the billing, the reimbursement, it all hinges on what a provider writes down at the point of care.
I really want this to sink in. The accuracy of the final bill doesn't just depend on the clinician's notes, it depends entirely on them. It's not just a small part of the puzzle, it is the puzzle. Every single financial step that follows is built on the quality and the detail of that initial documentation.
So, what do we mean by a complete clinical story? Well, it's all of these things, all working together. You need the patient's main complaint, of course, the exam findings, the assessment, the plan, but also every single procedure, every little supply used, and yep, even the exact amount of time spent. Each detail isn't just for keeping good records, it's a piece of evidence that coders and auditors need to justify the care provided.
Now, when documentation doesn't hit the mark, it usually creates one of two big problems. On one side, if the notes are vague or incomplete, you end up undercoding. That's just money left on the table, lost revenue. But on the flip side, if the notes are ambiguous, you risk overcoding, which is a whole other world of trouble. We're talking major compliance risks and audits. It's a really fine line. All right, so the story is documented. But how does that story get a price tag? Well, that brings us to our next piece, charge capture. I always think of this part as the bridge. It's what connects the clinical services that were provided to their actual financial value. And here's the key takeaway. Every single billable service has to be captured. It doesn't matter if it's a long consultation, a single sterile wipe, or a complex lab test. If it isn't documented and given a value right then and there, the organization simply doesn't get paid for it. It's as simple and as serious as that.
So, what does this journey look like in the real world? It starts with the patient receiving care. That care is immediately documented in the system. That documentation then triggers the charge capture, which assigns it a dollar value. And boom, just like that, a clinical action becomes a financial line item, all ready to be put on a claim.
This slide pretty much says it all, doesn't it? A single missed charge might not seem like a big deal, maybe just a small leak. But what happens when that leak happens dozens or even hundreds of times a day across a whole hospital? Suddenly, those tiny leaks become a massive flood of lost revenue. This is exactly why regular reconciliation is so important. It's how you find and plug those leaks.
Okay, so we've got our story documented, and we've captured the charges. Now it's time for the final translation. This is where the medical coders come in. Their job really is to take that entire clinical narrative and convert it into a standardized language of codes, a language that insurance payers can actually understand. Coders basically look at every encounter through two different lenses. First, they ask why. Why was the patient seen today? The answer to that comes from the ICD-10 codes, which explain the diagnosis. Then they ask what? What did we do for the patient? And that answer comes from the CPT codes, which describe the procedures and services. You absolutely have to have both to tell the whole story.
And believe me, getting this translation right is not optional. Any kind of mismatch between the why, the diagnosis, and the what, the procedure, is a huge red flag for payers. In fact, these simple coding errors are one of the top reasons that claims get denied, which means payment delays and a whole lot of extra work.
This really shows you how detailed the coder's job is. They have to be part detective, part language expert. They dig through all the notes to pick out the perfect codes and modifiers, and they have to make sure every single code is backed up by what the doctor wrote. Oh, and on top of all that, they have to stay current with thousands of code changes that happen every single year. It's intense. So, you see all these moving parts. How does a team actually get it right? Let's talk about some simple, actionable advice for each person involved in this whole mid-cycle process.
Okay, for the providers, the doctors and nurses on the front lines, the absolute biggest thing is to document as you go. Don't wait until the end of the day when you've forgotten the details, and be super specific.
Link that diagnosis directly to the procedure. Show why it was medically necessary. And hey, if a service is based on time, you've got to include those start and stop times, no exceptions.
Now, for the charge capture teams, it really comes down to consistency and routine. Simple things like using checklists can prevent so many errors. And doing regular reconciliations, comparing the appointment schedule to the clinical notes and then to the charges, that's the best way to make sure nothing falls through the cracks.
And finally, for our coders, it's all about being diligent and being a great communicator. Of course, you have to cross-check everything against coding rules and use software to catch errors. But maybe the most important tool is just picking up the phone or sending a message. Creating that easy feedback loop with providers when a note is unclear makes the entire system work better for everyone.
So you can really see how it all connects, right? The documentation creates the story, charge capture gives it value, and coding translates it. These three things build on each other to create this clean, accurate financial record that is now, finally, ready for the next step in its journey: claim submission.
Thank you for watching. Now you know how clinical documentation, charge capture, and coding form the backbone of your revenue cycle. If you found this helpful, please like and subscribe, and stay tuned for our next video on claim scrubbing and submission.